Holly had dreamed of working in medicine since she was young, but in the town where she lived, there was only a nursing school, and she was able to study to become a nurse. She was determined to go to the capital to further study and work. To rent an apartment in the capital and start a new life there, Holly worked hard during her studies and put money aside. She has found a modest apartment through the internet and set out to conquer the capital. The capital stunned her with its scale and luxury of the central streets. It was unusually noisy and crowded, especially in the subway, and at first Holly was even confused. The first night in the new place, she tossed and turned on the uncomfortable couch and could not sleep, and then burst into tears. Everything was unfamiliar around her, and she was afraid of what awaited her next. But people get used to everything. So it happened with Holly. She managed to get a job as a nurse in one of the city trauma surgeries, and the girl felt that life was getting better. Of course, at first it was not easy, both at home and at work. Holly had to carefully allocate the budget, learn saving to have enough money for her apartment and her own needs. In addition, she got a job at the trauma department during the hottest time of the year. The slippery streets, plus the citizens' attraction to outdoor activities in winter, provided a constant stream of traumatized patients. By early spring, it was a little calmer, but May was ahead, and then summer, and an experienced traumatologist said to Holly with a chuckle, "It's too early to relax. Soon the motorcyclists will come." And he was right. By early summer, motorcyclists began to come to them with alarming frequency. One day, a young, handsome guy named Simon was brought in. He had purchased a new motorcycle and decided to try to take it out to the fullest. Fortunately, he was lucky and only suffered a couple of fractures and some bad bruises. Holly liked Simon at first sight, and that really hindered her work. She was shaking with excitement, and now and then she dropped or spilled something, blushing terribly. At first, the young nurse's clumsiness irritated Simon, but when he began to recover, he noticed that the girl was quite good-looking. Simon himself was handsome, cheerful, and generous. He had his own apartment, an expensive car, and a lot of money, and he did not lack for female attention and changed girls one after another. When another nurse, Lena, noticed that Holly liked the new patient, they just laughed at her, explaining that such a common girl like her had nothing to do with such a rich man. Holly blushed and excused herself, saying that she did not even think about anything like that. But it so happened that the modest girl fell in the heart of a rich Lovelace. Of course, outwardly the young provincial seemed pale against the background of the shiny capital beauties with whom Simon used to communicate. But Holly's natural beauty, naivety, and pure look strongly captivated the spoiled guy's soul. When Simon was discharged, Holly thought that he would forget about her, but he, on the contrary, became very active, constantly texting her, calling and inviting her to go out. Soon, the rumour that Holly was dating a rich man spread throughout the hospital, making Lena even more jealous and angry. "Yes, you're lucky. You met such a prince," she grumbled through their teeth at the meeting. Holly smiled shyly and lowered her eyes, quietly walking on, while behind her back, Lena spread dirty gossip to ruin her life. She did not understand how such a rich and successful guy could be interested in such a simpleton. But she did not stop at gossip. Soon, Lena set Holly up, and eventually she was fired. Holly was ashamed to tell Simon about her situation. She looked for a job, but to no avail. The kind landlady allowed her to withhold payment, but it couldn't go on forever. Simon saw that something was going on with his girlfriend, and eventually he got the reason out of her after all. He was amazed at her modesty because she didn't even think to ask him for money. Soon after that, he asked Holly to marry him. Although Simon's parents were not happy that their son chose such a girl to be his bride, they helped to organize a magnificent wedding and sent the newlyweds on a romantic trip. Holly began to visit beauty salons, expensive boutiques, and changed so much that she outshone all of Simon's former girlfriends. But time passed, and Simon, as if he had played enough with his new doll, went back to his old habits. He began to go out, to have fun, to cheat on Holly, while his loving wife was diligently cleaning the apartment, cooking her husband delicious dinners, and trying to please him in everything. But he was not interested in all this. In addition, Simon was a terrible proprietor and jealous. He controlled all of Holly's calls, forbade communication with almost all of her friends, and even her mother had to call her on the sly. The woman felt that things were not going smoothly in her daughter's family life, but Holly calmed her down by saying that everything was fine. Over time, Simon stopped giving Holly money, allocating it only for groceries and household needs, and she had to save a lot to get at least a haircut. Besides, Simon did not even want to hear about her going to work, fearing the ridicule of his friends and colleagues. Feeling trapped, Holly cried into her pillow more and more often, not being able to pour out her soul to anyone. She had only one friend, Norma, the only one who had treated her well in her previous job, but even with her it was rarely possible to communicate, mostly over the phone and when Simon was absent. One day, Simon came home angry. He locked himself in the kitchen, and when half an hour later he came out, Holly felt a pungent smell of alcohol. Without any explanation, he walked right past her, slamming the front door. Holly had been trying to call him for 2 days, but he didn't answer. She didn't know what to think, and then Norma suddenly called and everything cleared up. "Holly, how are you there?" asked Norma with anxiety in her voice. "I seem to be fine. Why are you asking? Don't you know anything? Your husband ran over a young guy on a crosswalk and didn't even give him any money for treatment. His parents got him off, and now the guy will be an invalid." Holly was horrified by what she had heard and could not believe it. She asked her friend several times if she was sure that it was about Simon, but she had a reliable source in the police, and there could be no doubt. On the 3rd day, Simon came back, tired from his drinking binge, and went straight to bed. In the morning, Holly asked him about what had happened, but he did not even dignify her with a response. 2 months passed. Norma told her that the injured man, whose name was Edward, had been discharged from the hospital. Holly wished him well and hoped that everything would be all right. A time passed and life returned to normal. Simon hung out and Holly stayed at home. But one day, when her husband left for a business trip, Holly felt free and immediately met Norma in a cafe. They sat and chatted, and suddenly Holly remembered about Edward. "I often think of him. I wonder how he is," asked Holly sadly. "How? You don't know anything again. Not only is this guy left handicapped, but he is also now nowhere to live. He has no relatives. He lost his job because of his injury, and he can't rent an apartment either. Now he lives in a shelter, begging for money. I give him money from time to time. He He's a good guy." Holly was horrified and asked Norma to take her to the place where Edward usually goes. He turned out to be a nice, well-mannered young man, dirty and hungry and with big, sad eyes. When Holly saw him, she knelt down in front of him and begged his forgiveness for Simon. "Oh no, you don't have to. You are not responsible for your husband. I do not hold it against you. Anything in life happens." Holly suddenly had a strange idea. "Edward, we're going to my house now. There you will wash and eat and get a good night's sleep. You need it." Edward felt uncomfortable and tried to refuse, but seeing how determined the woman was, he decided not to argue. At home, Holly cleaned Edward up, fed him, and changed into Simon's clothes. Then Holly called her mother for advice, and the woman advised her to show Edward to Holly's father's old friend. He was a professor of medicine and was indebted to her now deceased father, and as a man of honour, could not refuse help. Holly was so happy that she did not immediately hear the key turn in the lock, realizing that it was Simon, who for some reason returned 2 days early. The woman prepared herself for a scandal and did not have to wait long. Holly tried to explain that the man was the one who had been run over by Simon, but Simon denied any involvement in the incident and demanded that the homeless man leave the apartment immediately. Holly wanted to call Edward a cab, but then Simon said something that made Holly's face change. "I don't want your lovers taking cab rides at my expense," shouted Simon. "What? I've always been faithful to you, Simon. Unlike you," the girl said slowly, and with those words, she showed a picture on her phone where her naked husband was with some blonde. Holly silently began to gather her things, while Simon showered her with insults. "And I'm even glad you found out. She's not like you. You can get out of here with your invalid. I'm fed up with your care." Holly silently left the apartment with a suitcase, slamming the door. She decided to sell the jewellery her husband gave her and spent the proceeds on Edward's treatment. She thought it would be a fair thing to do. After that, she took Edward to the professor's house. Seeing his old friend's daughter, the man was delighted and immediately understood why they had come to see him. He suggested that Holly and Edward stay with him for the time being, and after a few days, he and his colleagues studied Edward's case history, and after some discussion, they came to the conclusion that the man had a chance. Edward was admitted to a hospital, and Holly was able to get a job there as a nurse. She diligently looked after him. Edward liked the kind and beautiful Holly very much, and they soon had a stormy romance. "You've fallen in love with a patient again," said Norma, laughing. "No, it's different now," Holly answered confidently. Soon, Holly rented a modest, tiny apartment so as not to bother the professor, and brought Edward a laptop. As it turned out, he had recently graduated from a programming course, and before the accident, he did an internship in one of the IT companies. So the computer was of vital importance to him. While the excruciating recovery from the surgery went on, to distract himself, he perfected his skills and even began to work remotely. 5 years passed. Edward and Holly were already married. Holly worked in a private clinic, and Edward quickly made a dizzying career in an IT company. One day, Simon was vacationing at a resort when he suddenly saw his ex-wife. She was walking by the hand with a slim, handsome man, and a cute little girl was running beside them and laughing merrily. "Did you see that?" exclaimed Simon's blonde wife. "I'm subscribed to her on social media. You should see what kind of house they have. And they live such an interesting life, not like us. Why did I ever get involved with you? You lost your business, you spent your parents' money, and you're worth nothing without them." Simon listened in silence and looked at Holly. She recognized him too, but walked past him with just a smile. No, she did not hold a grudge against her ex-husband, because life itself had put everything in its place.